So this isn't a bad view. This is a somewhat complex but actually well-designed hood. The Canadian flag going over these vents on the Jeep hood with the leaf in the middle, which was just a matter of trying to line it up for a million years. But the stripes on the sides are completely enclose the vent, which was good design. So I don't have to bridge any ridiculous gaps, and I just kind of centered it over so that I had a wide border as I could around. There wasn't any too thin of pieces to make this work. I still had to set it up pretty carefully. I don't actually remember if this was wrapped, but it had better have been. Once I get it all set up, you can see me lightly trim out the vent with lots of bleed forgiveness using my other finger as a guide. And then you can carefully peel it up with the tip of your blade if you're careful enough, and then that allows you to tuck in the free edge. Now, the plastic itself is pretty textured, so there's very low tack. I didn't have to mask it off, and I didn't have to be afraid of it sticking and then, not tucking properly, tenting, overstretching, or trimming crooked. This was fairly simple. In theory, it's complex, but I made it as simple as possible, and the designer was working with me on this one to make the install as easy as possible. He's experienced at that, so that's always a plus. This job was an incredible amount of precision trimming. It has to be uniform gaps, and it has to be very clean looking. It has to look factory because it is white on red. You can tell immediately if something is not perfect. It's very high contrast, and it is a pretty job. It's not just a logo on a door. It has to be beautiful. This is a cosmetic sort of appeal, and that made this, kind of required a lot of my experience. So we pull the knifeless tape here, and I didn't get the perfect gap. I had to trim or correct a lot of it by hand, which never comes out perfect. So you got to do the best you can, and you got to do it quickly, and you got to do it safely. Always seal those edges. Never lean on the hood in such a way that you crimp it or lean on a vulnerable spot. That's always a bad day. And it never hurts to step back and look at it for a second and make sure everything looks fine. You never want to walk away from a crooked decal. You can see this one is already set up. I cut out the shape in order to fit around that fender. Those roof fenders on the Jeeps, they are such a pain to work around, and you got to have some sort of pre-cut shape when you're starting out, or you're just going to fight it, especially when it's masked like this. And I did pre-mask this vinyl because working with a stripe where you're trying to make it look straight, it's not going to work out if you're working with just plain vinyl with no mask protection on top. And even as you work with this, it will walk, and you'll get wobbles. It needs to be masked if you want it to look perfect. I did not remove the antennae. I cut a hole in the vinyl, and I looped it over top of the antennae in a spot where I had pre-measured, and then I cut it out by hand around the antennae after it was set up. It was easier than trying to remove it. I did try to find an easy way, and if it takes longer to remove it and put it back on than it does to just trim around the object, then it's not worth it, especially with the risk of breaking or losing parts. So there it is, it's walking on me. I had to trim a straight line on the top of the decal as well as the bottom, and I could barely reach the bottom. I did it as deep as I could, but you can only go so deep before you're holding your knife at a weird angle and you're using unnecessary force to compensate, but it's dangerous to the paint. job, and you're not going to be precise anyway, so you can see the red underneath. If from any other angle, you can't, because the fender's in the way anyway. So just make it look straight, make it look clean. Someone looks down there, they shouldn't see a mess, so it's better for them to see the red, who cares, but the top line, that one needs to be straight too. And all in all, I think all of the trim lines turned out pretty good. They look pretty good. There's a bunch of weird stuff on this one, so stay tuned for part 2.